Kevin and I connected in the podcast space online, and a few weeks ago, I was on his podcast, Sad Times. It turns out that Kevin and I have a lot in common, including a long history with anxiety and panic attacks. Now, don't let that scare you. I think you'll really enjoy Kevin's humorous and sarcastic approach to mental health. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I do want to say, at this recording, we did record a couple weeks ago. We have not released it yet, but don't worry. Now, as I watch you and learn how to do social media, I will tag you once we do release yours in the upcoming weeks.
Perfect. Look forward to sharing that to the
Yes,
internets,
yes,
to the Googles and the internets.
and the chat GPTs who will then explain to us what we just shared.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's jump right into this, Kevin. You have as I said, a long history with anxiety. Let's go back in time and tell us when that started.
Yeah, when we conversed a little bit beforehand, I did make a attempt at a pithy remark to say it started when I was born, but really, I would say it was about when I was 4 was when I really started to notice it. I was someone who would get very anxious and wanted to make sure everybody around me felt okay and was okay. The first time I had a knowing panic attack, or at least where I felt like this doesn't feel right, I was about 5 years old. I was staying at my grandparents, and I was sitting in the living room at their house, and it was almost as if the walls were closing in on me because I just kept having the same thought over and over again. I'm going to run away. I'm going to run away. I'm going to run away. Now, I didn't want to run away, but I was so afraid I was going to run away. And I became consumed with that fear. So I'm consumed with this fear, which is antithetical to what I want to be doing at that moment, which was sitting in that chair thinking about the Cubs or something. And I was consumed by the fear, but also was a part of me was thinking to myself, but I don't want to do this. Why am I so worried about it? And this was long before I had any sort of mental health diagnosis. This is a couple years before I started therapy. And I had no idea about what that disconnect meant or what my perception of reality when I am anxious meant. Like I couldn't have dove down into any of those things. But at the time, I was just very afraid and very confused.
Wow, that must have been frightening, especially as a little kid.
Yeah, it was pretty hardcore. And I think this is true of, and maybe this will be true of some of your listeners. I had all these thoughts. I got through it, but I didn't know how to talk to anybody about it because I didn't know how to explain to them. I thought if I went up to my grandma and said, I'm afraid I'm going to run away, she would say something very loving like, well, you're not going to run away. We won't let you. You're going to be just safe here. But when I try to explain, I don't want to run away, that's when you get the perplexed look like, well, why are you afraid of it?
Mhm.
And so I just kind of kept it to myself. And that's something that I've done a lot of my life is I've kept my worries to myself because I don't know how to, or I didn't always know how to explain them to people. And often, too, at no fault of anybody else's, if you start to have a long explanation about the struggles that you're having, that can cause the anxiety for them. Like, well, wait, I don't understand what you're talking about and all this stuff. So I think I learned early on self-learning behavior. Nobody taught me this to keep it to myself and just get through it and make sure everybody else is okay.
I know myself with anxiety in particular, I felt really stupid saying
What
the
do you mean?
things,
Like, just saying them out loud.
saying them out loud.
Mm-hmm.
It just, as soon as I started saying them out loud, it just sounded ridiculous that I would be
Right.
anxious about something. And then I was self conscious and then I wouldn't want to embarrass myself. And it's like you say, it's just for a variety of reasons, it's sometimes easier to keep it on the inside. Not so much healthy, but easier.
Right. Or what we think is easier. Right.
You're
And
right.
it goes to something else that I've learned over the many years that often what's going on. I'm a big believer in storytelling. I believe as I have said a couple of times, stories are the great healing power of humankind. The more we hear, the more we heal. But there's an adverse to that. And there are stories we tell ourselves in our head that
Mhm.
are, in your case that you just said, that's stupid, or I'm self-conscious about that. That's a story where, let's just say it's you and one other person and you don't want to tell them. It's almost as if you're taking their agency away too, without giving them the chance to say, well, no, Lisa, it's not stupid. Or Kevin, no, it's not weird that you are afraid you want to run away, but you're not wanting to run away.
Yeah. That's really interesting too. And I know we had talked about, the quote unquote voices in our head, right?
Yeah.
I love you. You call yours Frank. Tell us
Yeah,
a
he's a
little bit about
motherfucker.
Frank.
Frank's a motherfucker. I do want to say where Frank's name came from. I'm a big Tom Waits fan, and he has a record from 1983 called Frank's Wild Years. And there's a song on there, I believe. No, I'm sorry. 1983 was Swordfish Trombones with a song called Frank's Wild Years. He then had a record called Frank's Wild Years in 1987. Anyway, the song Frank's Wild Years is a spoken word song about this dude who's just a dick and crazy and likes to drink Mickey's Big Mouths and burns down a house. And so I thought, that seems like the type of voice I've got going on in my head. And it's not that I hear voices. I'm lucky that I do not struggle with that. It's that it's my inner critic, right?
Yeah.
Critic being the nicest word I could ever say about Frank, because he's much worse than that. He, for example, many times I've talked to somebody and I'm talking to them and Frank is literally saying, you fucking idiot. They don't care what you're saying. You're not saying it right. You said too many times. What the fuck are you doing? You're not, just shut up, Kevin. Nobody wants to hear from you. Why don't you just go over there? I mean, it's just constant.
Constant, hey? I have
Yeah.
a Karen. I have a Karen.
Karen, there you go.
Yeah. And my apologies to any listeners who are named Karen, but my voice is Karen and she's really annoying. I wouldn't say that she's always in my head criticizing me, but yeah, she's calling me a dumbass quite often for a variety of things. And I do think that and I don't know if that's normal. I'd like to know how many people have that negative self-talk going on.
I like to think, my best guess is this. I think that there are variations of it, just like there are variations on most things. And I think, you know, certain people, it's very quiet, right? And then certain people, it's very loud. And I think a good example of this is something I've noticed about myself the last couple of years. I'm holding up my phone here, and I misplace that thing all the time. And it doesn't help that when I'm on the phone almost all the time, I have my wireless headphones on, so I'm walking around. And often I say out loud to myself, when I can't find it, I say things, and I'm not kidding, things like, Kevin, you're a failure. Kevin, you idiot, out loud. And then I've learned to stop and say, well, it's just a phone. So maybe not. But even this morning, I'm currently in a hotel room. And even this morning, as I went to leave, I had left the bolt lock thing on. So I opened the door and it caught and it gave me a start. And I said, before I even thought about it, I said, you fucking idiot, come on, about something like that. Right. And it's that. And I'm not saying feel sorry for me. Please don't think that. That type of negative self-talk throughout the day about something as innocuous as a bolt lock, it adds up for people. And it really can be very difficult to deal with.
Mm-hmm. And I think especially, we're talking about mental health here.
Yeah.
Like to hear ourselves talking to ourselves. I mean, the person that we spend the most time with, that we should love the most, and we talk the trashiest to.
Right.
That's not good on a good day when life is good. But when we're in the worst of it. Yeah, I can't imagine anything worse. And yet we do it all the time. All the time.
It's almost as if, have you thought about why we do it all the time? Do you have any hypotheses about that?
I do. And I don't know if it fits or not. I think growing up, I was the kid. I was never an outsider per se, but I was never one of the cool kids. I was always on the periphery, moved around a lot. There was a variety of reasons, but I found that acceptance a lot of times came from self-depreciating humor. And
Yes, I'm sorry. No, I'm nodding, but yes, very much. Yep.
yeah, and I feel like that has just stuck, even though, logically, I'm a reasonably intelligent human being. Logically, I know that that is damaging. Logically, I know that I'm not stupid. I flub up. I do silly things. I'm a human being, but I catch myself on the daily, just trash talking myself. And that's why I wonder, like, does everybody do this? I
I
don't know.
think there's very, I think it's got to be on a spectrum.
Maybe.
Because, and then, I've had therapists say to me, well, now I'll explain a situation to them and I'll be like, I'm so mad at myself about X, Y, or Z. And they'll say, well, Kevin, what would happen if your good friend came to you and said that they were in this situation? I'd say, well, that makes sense. That's normal. They're going to be fine. And they said, well, what's the difference between them and you? And I say, oh, well, I can't give myself that break. And there's probably I don't really know. The best answer I could come up with is I still think it's some form of control. I still think think that I am in some way exercising control over the situation by putting myself down. And I think that's foolish, but I think that at some point these voices develop in our heads, and maybe they had a small need at that time that they met, but these patterns develop in our brains, and then we grow and they stay and they get larger and larger and larger and larger, and so getting out of those patterns is a whole other thing.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I read something a month or so ago, and it keeps coming up daily in my life because I think it's so true. We do more of what we do more of, and we get better at what we do more of. So, for example, if you trash talk yourself on the daily, that's a habit,
Mm.
right? Like it's a habit, and it's something that I'm guessing would be as hard to stop doing as smoking or, going on a diet or changing your eating habits, whatever. And, you think of, I've been doing this for a number of decades now, right? So this isn't going to be something that I just read about, think about, hear about, and go, oh, I'm so done that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, it's something that I would like to stop, and I would like to see you stop, and I would like to see everybody who's struggling with that, because it doesn't help us, right? And even I think about raising kids.
Yeah.
Like our kids definitely will all the time follow what we do more than follow what we say. Right. So if mom is constantly looking in the mirror, I'm too fat, I've got to go on a diet, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? Kids are going to probably start saying, particularly daughters. And same thing with the self-depreciation, right?
Mm.
Kids are going to grow up hearing that too. So yeah, something that we've got to stop. But let's change direction a little bit here. You and I had talked about this a little bit before we jumped on, and I love your sarcasm. Honestly, like your sarcasm and humor. What do you think the place, or do you think that humor has a place with mental health, and why?
Absolutely. I think that humor has a place most places in the world.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to say the word place again. Place, 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 place. So humor, I had a long time ago, I had a realization, which was the only thing, there's so many things befuddling in life and so many things befuddling in the world, that the only thing that seems to make sense in any situation is kindness. Every time, 100%. But I think a close second is humor. And humor absolutely has a place in mental health, because if we take ourselves, in my opinion, if we take ourselves too seriously, we're in for a difficult road, because you have to laugh at yourself. And the way that I get through all the painful things that I've been through in my life is dark humor. I have to laugh at it. And before we got on, I told you about that thing that my mom said. And basically I said to my mom, oh, I know why I was around, so has a very, very dark sense of humor. We're at the Mayo Clinic, and she's here. She has cancer, and I said, Mom, I'm thinking about writing a travel diary for this. And she goes, oh, you can call it Before My Mom Died. And that right there is a home run to me. I think that's perfect, because, well, we're all going to die anyway. So humor has to be there, because humor also elicits joy. Humor makes you laugh. I think of the movie Airplane a lot. That's my favorite movie of all time. And that movie makes more sense to me than most anything I've seen, because it's so absurd all of the time, and it's so funny. And if we take not only ourselves too seriously, but the whole world around us, again, it's going to be tough going, I think. So I think there is that line you have to walk with people, because some people are in different steps in their mental health journey, and they're not comfortable with the humor around it. And so, like, on sad times, we do have levity when appropriate. That there are times where humor maybe is not appropriate, but most of the time I firmly believe it is. And going back to the self-deprecating humor that you were talking about a moment ago, the summer of 1995, I got really obsessed with David Letterman. And because I could stay up late, I didn't have to get up to go to school, so I could watch his show. And he is Mr. Self-deprecation. That's like all his humor is, that and irony all day, every day. And it really struck a chord with me. And I thought it was really funny, because it also keeps people off guard, but it shows I like that guy, because he doesn't think he's better than anybody, or any of that, right? So humor is unbelievably important to me.
Do you seek funny things out, or do you seek things out that make you chuckle or laugh?
Not as often as I should, actually. Like, my favorite thing in art is sadness. And the reason I say that is sadness, when I see sadness being put back to me in art, it makes my life make sense. It makes me feel less alone. Now, I know a lot of people don't, they don't like that. They need only an escape in art. And their escape is, oh, I'm going to go watch a comedy. Makes sense. I think that I could do more of that, but then Frank comes in and says, well, you're not doing enough. Why are you watching that Instagram reel? You should be reading. You should be writing. Apparently arithmetic too, reading, writing, arithmetic. And I don't allow myself that break for that joy. But that's a mistake on my part, I think. And that's a pattern I've learned. So I do seek out certain things. I love comedy, but I think it has to be curated around what mood I'm in, if that makes any sense.
No, I think I understand that completely. And I wonder too, I mean, we definitely don't want to go down that path of blaming our parents for everything. But I wonder, myself, so just very aligned to what you're saying there, except my thing is, I don't allow myself to have fun until all the work is done, all the things on the list are all crossed off, the dishwasher's empty. Like, is that stuff ever all done? No. So
No.
I find myself always having a reason not to go and have the fun. So a little bit different from funny, seeking out humor, but along the same lines. And that, not to blame anybody, but that was kind of ingrained in me growing up. To be successful, you got to work first and play when there's time. And I've kind of become an unfun person, I want to say. And I just wonder if it, again, these are ingrained thoughts, or if it's a control thing, or why we get into those habits.
Well, I think a couple things. These couple thoughts come to mind. With one, I think you're a fun person, so stop that bullshit. Two, the human condition. Everybody says human nature, human condition. I think one of the things in the human condition that we don't acknowledge often is overcorrection. So we see something and say, I'm going to do better, or I'm going to do that more. And we overcorrect. And usually it's like a pendulum. We go way the hell over here. And then we're like, we beat ourselves up or whatever. And we start to realize through the mental health work, etc., okay, we got to come back over here. It's not everything's the end of the world. If I, to use your example, if I don't empty the dishwasher before I have a glass of wine, and watch Airplane. The other thing is, I think I've lost it. So overcorrection is one of them. And I think that, nuance. Nuance is a word that has a meaning, but that meaning does not seem to be appearing in a lot of the culture anymore. Nuance is, do you know the US show Yellowstone?
Yes.
So I watched the first episode of that, and that's all I've watched. And I got done with the episode, and I said, you know what that show doesn't have any of? And it's nuance. It's just beating you over the head with it, which is fine. But when having complicated discussions about mental health, about the way we treat ourselves, people forget about the nuance of it, and that it's not all or nothing all of the time.
Right.
So and yes, I was told the same thing. You got to work hard to get ahead, etc. Yes, of course, but there are limits to that. And the easiest example I can do of that is I've got this bottle of water. There is a way that you can overdose on water. If you drink too much water, you drown your cells.
Yeah.
So let me get back to work on that. I never learned to swim, so that'll help with that.
There we go.
So yeah.
When we talked before as well, you said that you really struggle with self-doubt and and imposter syndrome. And I guess that kind of ties all into, what we've been talking about here today as well. Like that Frank guy. Is he playing a role in that?
Oh yes. Frank is the president, CEO, CFO, COO of the Kevin Self-Doubt Institute. And he has built quite a massive bureaucracy. And I did a writing exercise a number of years back where I started to write a letter to Frank. Okay, so I'm typing it out, I'm writing it. And then I started to let Frank's responses get typed out, and I would quickly switch to italic, and it would be Frank's response. Then back to me, non-italic. By the end of the letter was like the last page was all italics, which is him just beating me down.
Wow.
Yeah. And it went out with my Christmas card, and I lost a lot of friends. I'm just kidding. I don't send Christmas cards. I've always wanted to send a Christmas card where it's just me looking very confused and angry and alone, and just send it to people and be like, happy holidays. Because I think that'd be fucking hilarious. But I digress. So,
well, honestly, yeah. I dare ya. Double dog dare ya.
I also was taught to save your money when I was a kid. So Frank says to me, Frank is not interested in nuance either. So Frank's like, you're not going to spend that money on that. What are you going to do? You're going to waste your money on a joke like that, which wouldn't be a waste, as we just talked about for 10 minutes, because it would make people laugh, and laughter is great.
So true. So true. So I know I struggle. I'm getting better at it, but I struggle with a lot of things. But do you have this thought that you need to, quote unquote, fix your anxiety, fix your mental health, fix anything about you? Or have you kind of gotten to this place where this is me, this is Kevin, and I accept that. Here's me.
I think I'm probably more in the latter. I think I've spent a lot of my time trying to fix it, or trying to understand it. And by understanding it, think that I have control over it, when really control's an illusion. So I think I mostly accept it. I think where that gets dangerous is, so I've been diagnosed with OCD. and to put too much of how you see yourself in your diagnosis or how you view yourself gets to be, if you're accepting of it, but at the same time say, I am OCD Kevin, blah, 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 gets, again, nuance over correction gets you into trouble. I feel less about needing to fix it because I have done a lot of work through therapy, through medication, working out, etc., that helps me balance that. And it's helped me understand that who I am is not just my anxiety, but an anxiety. I've heard a lot of my mentors or people who I look up to call it a superpower, right? So my OCD, it can be debilitating, but it also has led me to accomplish a lot of stuff because it does keep me focused and driven and etc. So I don't think that I necessarily need to fix it as much anymore. Although Frank is telling me, and I'm not kidding, Frank is telling me right now, no, you do need to fix it. Be honest, Kevin. You always feel like you are not doing enough. So the version of me that I like, the non-Frank version, right,
Mhm.
is saying everything's okay, but there's still work that I need to do to allow myself to sit quietly with that feeling that everything is okay and not have to immediately jump on top of it and make changes to it. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
And I, first of all, I think, can you fire Frank? Like, he might be the
I've tried
CEO,
to
but maybe it's time to give him the boot.
uh I've tried. The board of directors won't let me, which is just a bunch of mini Franks. The motherfucker cloned himself too. And look, he's not good company and he's not funny. And, I did a one-man show coming up on 7 years ago. I can't believe that. And there's a part where I talk about, right, I'm pointing at the center of my forehead. So often when I'm very anxious, I feel it right there. And I talk about how sometimes I want to break into my brain with a spoon and dig it out because I can't take the feeling anymore. And that has gotten a little better as I've gone through 32 years of therapy and other tools, etc. But it becomes so intense that I want anything but to feel that. And I think that is kind of one of the dirty little secrets about people with severe anxiety is they know they're not in their right mind when they think I'll do anything to not feel this, but it is very so uncomfortable
Mhm.
that we just want to do anything. And so what we do, which perpetuates it, is we try to fight that thought or that feeling, which invites the thought to stay. And then you just are doing this instead of just sitting with the thought, right? And then letting the thought dissipate on its own. But it's so that I call it the voice, then I call it the anxiety, then I call it a world. So what I mean is the voice will say something. Here's an example in a workplace. Somebody, my boss comes in and says, Kevin, can you pop in my office for a second, right? My voice says, she's mad at you, you're going to get fired, which causes a feeling of anxiety. That anxiety is that unease we feel, which is actually what's the word I want? Evolutionary trait, right? To save us, but it is bastardized and magnified. So then you get that feeling, which causes you to create a world to stop that feeling in your brain. And it happens in like 4 seconds. So it goes, Kevin, can you come step in my office for a second? I'm going to be fired. Oh God, what am I going to do? You start to feel something. And then all of a sudden in the world, you're walking out after having packed a box of your stuff and being ashamed as you walk by everybody because you've lost your job. And all that happens almost always way faster than we even know it's happened. And then what happens, happen. What happens is I think, at least I, more often than not in my life, have clung on to the world I've created and forgotten about when she just popped her head in my office. Even so, in this example, that I go into the office and I'm like, not literally shaking, but very afraid. And they're like, "Oh, we just wanted to let you know that next Tuesday we're going to be closed, whatever it may be." And you're like, "Oh," and so it's like a push pull, push pull, push pull, and that goes on for so many people all day, every day. And often, unfortunately, because so many people are parents and they're worried about paying their bills and they're worried about obviously their children, maybe other members of their family, friends, they don't even have the time or the luxury to sit back and say, well, now let's follow that train of thought in my mind there for a moment. I did this, this, and this. Oh, wow, that's what happened. I created this whole world when that world didn't exist. If that makes sense.
Yep. Been there. Been there. You and I talked about this, I think, on your podcast, but I feel for the most part, I'm not, not perfect at all, but I feel like I have my anxiety under control better now than I did, 20, 30 years ago. But it kind of came back to this one question that I would repeat over and over again. And I don't know if anybody else finds it helpful, but I would ask myself, is this the end of the world?
Mm.
Like this thought I'm having, this worry I'm having, is this the end of the world? And most of the time, the answer was no. The world will not end, if I get fired. The world will not end, if the garage doesn't get organized. I know, yes, talk about OCD. Yeah, that's another. Yeah. Oh, yes. I've had panic attacks over the garage will not be organized by this weekend like I had planned. Yes, this is true.
Yeah.
But, you know, in my family, we've also had the worst possible thing happen to us. I mean, we've lost a child in a car accident. And that has also changed my perspective on things as well, because frankly, I don't think anything can compare to that. So I feel like I've been through the worst.
Mm.
So, other than, God forbid, losing another member of my family, my son, for example, um, anything else is survivable. But it's a lot of it is perspective.
Perspective. I love that word. I love the value in perspective. Having perspective, it's one of the most valuable things in the world, but it's rarely there on time.
Oh, 100%.
I once was writing something, and I think I used the words, "We're perspective like lightning," like we're like this, bam. That would solve a lot of
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's been, that idea of stepping back from a situation, and that never happens in the heat of the moment, right?
Oh no, yeah,
Never, never, never. It's time, and sometimes you just don't get there. You
right.
just don't have that opportunity to look at it through different glasses.
And I think the way that you and I are saying that in a very solemn, accepting way says a lot about both of us, right? To know that we are closer to forgiving ourselves for that than we may have been, as you said, 20 or 30 years ago. To say, you know what, I didn't do as well today. I'm going to try again tomorrow.
Oh, I love
And
that.
yeah, and it's what I've learned is, so I call it, there are two types of selfish, right? The one type of selfish we all know, and that's what I call the Ayn Rand selfishness, which is bullshit, annoying, petulant 6-year-old child didn't get her way, so now we have Alan Greenspan. And then the second type of selfishness is actually the good mental health selfishness, which is, as you said earlier, I spend the most time with myself. I should love myself the most. And the way that I've been able to get towards that second type of selfishness, the non-bad selfishness, is that if you do it in small doses every day, and just know that, okay, today I was a little nicer to myself, and tomorrow, you know what, I might take 10 steps back, but I'm going to take another step forward again. That stuff does start to change the patterns in your mind. And I don't know the neurological science or any of that, but for me, repetition, I think you said, whatever we do the most, we become the best at.
Mm-hmm.
If we're nicest to ourselves, the opposite of what you were saying, mean to ourselves, that starts to change too. But the way I talk to people about it when they come to me, and obviously I say, do as I do as I say, not as I do. But you got to do it in small doses, because if you think, okay, tomorrow everything's gonna be great, well, you're setting up yourself up for failure.
For sure. I think everything starts with awareness,
Mm.
right? Even just being aware of Frank and Karen, just being aware of the negative chatter, being aware of the habits, being aware, geez, even after you say it, Lisa, you dumbass. Yeah, okay. That's not serving me well. Awareness, right? I'm going to try not to say that anymore. Or, being aware of just the terrible things that we do for ourselves and to ourselves. I think first we have to be aware, and then we have to believe that change is possible, and that a change would be in our best interest. So for example, kicking Karen to the curb when she shows up, or being able to just have that perspective on the spot, which is really hard. But when Karen shows up, it's like, okay, shut up. I'm done.
I
I'm done
sometimes
with
say
you.
that out loud. I don't know if
Yeah.
you do.
Oh,
I
I do.
say, you're not welcome here, or shut up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I can't go to Kroger anymore. Just kidding. But I say it out loud because it's almost as if it's like, I'm now putting my foot down and we're moving forward, right?
Right.
In awareness, I love what you said about awareness and then belief. And belief is similar to hope. And if you believe that things can get better, then I think the third thing is the actions and the work. Because the thing is, people always say, well, knowing is half the battle. To which I would say, well, often with my mental health struggles, I'm the Alexander the Great of half the battle. But the other half, I don't have a fucking clue. I don't know how to change it. Mm-hmm. So awareness is the first step. And it's very difficult to have the awareness, but there's also that second step. I guess third step, because second step is believing. And then third step of doing the work to make the change so you can do it differently going forward. But it's hard, man. It's really hard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's why a lot of us are in this club, right? It's because it's not easy. It's not something you can read one book about, or listen to one podcast episode, or, go to one counseling therapy session. It's an ongoing process. But I think that segues perfectly into my next question. And that is, what do you do to help yourself?
Exercise. So when the pandemic hit, I had been going to gyms for a while, and I would do like the elliptical or things like that for the cardio part. Well, all the gyms closed, and I had a very stressful job at the time, and I said, well, I'm going to lose my fucking mind. And I hate running, but I was like, I got to run. So I'd start running. And I became a bit of a runner, and that helps a lot. That helps me clear my head. It helps me organize my thoughts, and it kind of tires me out. I think what a lot of people maybe who aren't as anxious don't realize about anxiety is it is exhausting. I know somebody who has a puppy, and one of the ways that she keeps her puppy calm, especially if the weather's bad, is she gives them little puzzles to try to get the treats out, because it engages their brain and it wears them out. It's the same thing with anxiety. You could see somebody sitting there all day worrying, and then they're like, God, I'm exhausted. And they're like, you didn't do anything. But your body becomes so exhausted from the use of your brain. And so running not only enriches your brain, it allows your brain to reorient itself, very much like sleep. And so exercise is a big one for me. Writing, if I am able to get over the Frank hump, I guess we'll call it, which sounds terrible. If I can get over the Frank hump and actually write, I always write to figure something out. And one of my favorite things about writing is you start to write, and then it could be a couple sentences or a couple paragraphs. You're writing about something you had no idea you were going to write about, because it just comes, because it's allowing those thoughts to flow freely. So exercise, writing, and then mental health advocacy, and making sure that people, through the Sad Times podcast, through motivational speaking that I'm trying to do, making sure that allowing people to share their stories and be somebody who can be there to listen and serve people that way is another good positive thing for me, because when I was a kid, I had all these racing thoughts, and I really thought nobody's brain is like this. I'm insane. I don't know what to do. I felt so isolated, so alone. And then I found out, no, other people go through this. And there was such an unbelievable relief to learn that I was not the only one going through this. And it wasn't relief that others were suffering. It was relief that I was not alone. And that's why I think stories are the great healing currency of humankind, because they help us feel less alone. So I guess those things. Oh, and reading, fucking reading. I'd always rather be reading, always. And if this phone fucks that up a little bit, but sometimes I'll put the phone in another room and I'll just sit with a book for an hour or whatever. People say, "Oh, I don't have time for reading," to which I say, "Well, you can make time for reading."
Yeah.
Quaint for me to say for somebody who has maybe 2 jobs and children, right? That's different. But somebody maybe in my position who has no children, you can always make time for reading. And I believe that we as a society, the greatest thing we ever did as a society was not invent the wheel, although that has helped. It was public libraries, because public libraries allow people to congregate. They allow people to understand ideas they'd never thought of. I think at the Chicago Public Library, where I used to go almost daily, there was a quote from Oprah Winfrey on the wall that said something to the effect of, getting my library card was like getting my citizenship. And so reading, understanding new ideas, being challenged by ideas, it is very good for me. And I think it's good for us as a race of people.
Well, and I think it, on some level, it circles back to what you had said earlier about the power of stories. And I mean, to me, a book is a story, even if it's not a fictitious, boy meets girl, whatever, or the Three Little Pigs. A book is still a story, even if it's all based on fact. It's all about World War II, or all about, politics, or all about whatever. It's a story. And I think our stories are very powerful. And what I have learned in the advocacy space as well is that when we tell our story, it allows other people to feel safe telling theirs. How many times have you shared a story where you've said, gosh, I really struggle with anxiety or this or that, and somebody else says, oh my God, me too. Let me tell you about that. Yeah.
That's so well said. And one of the great parts of stories and being human.
Yeah. So I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to say that not the greatest thing is not maybe libraries, but the old campfire when we were cave people, instead of clubbing each other over the head at night, we were maybe grunting out a story or using our stick to draw a story in the dirt. Because that's how the information was brought forward.
Yes, but to satirize the years I've spent in corporate culture, but is that scalable, Lisa? No, come on.
No, it is not.
Word scale is. Good Lord. Anyway, no, I think that's a very fair point, and I take your point. I think it's right. And yeah, instead of clubbing yourself over the head with it, using the club to draw in the sand or somehow to write on the wall with it, right?
There you go. See, look at how far we've come. Look at how far
we've come. Yeah. I mean, we've got bottled water. We pay like $3 for it.
Right?
Yeah.
What gives you hope, Kevin?
Kindness. Kindness gives me hope above all else, I think. I'll use your phrasing, it's not the end of the world. That gives me hope. I think for me personally, the more I learn about how the universe was made, the more I learn about my infantile spot in it, gives me hope. It makes me realize now it makes you realize not everything is that big of a deal. Now, I still have my emotions, I still have my reactions, etc. So I still struggle with that. That gives me hope. Kindness, humor gives me hope. The fact that we are able to change gives me hope. And I think mortality gives me some hope. And what I mean by that is it you know, if you read Walt Whitman, who I adore, it helps you focus on now instead of then.
Mm,
And
that
that is hopeful to me.
that is powerful. You're
Yeah.
right. I think
Now, I fail at that most of the time, but it does help me get there when I need to.
mhm. What about resilience? What does resilience mean to you?
Resilience is, again, I'm going to go back to kindness. It's forgiveness. It's quite literally persistence. Maybe I use that grammatically wrong, literally. It is, oh, I wrote it down on that sheet. What else did I put down?
Trying to be more empathetic.
True.
Laughing at myself and the world.
True.
Trying to be kind to myself. It's not easy.
It is not easy. But you know, as I've gotten older, as I've done some work in therapy, as I've tried to make changes to my patterns, I've learned that beating myself down is the opposite of resilience, and forgiving myself is kind of quintessential resilience. So, but man, is it hard? It's very, very difficult.
Yeah. But it's like riding a bike, and in only in the sense that we fall down a lot when we're first learning, and we just have to keep getting on that damn thing, right?
Yeah.
Even though we're all scabbed up and scarred up, you just keep getting back on it.
That's right.
Ride a little farther the next time before you fall off.
True.
So we haven't really talked about your podcast, Sad Times, yet. So before we wrap things up here, can you give us a little synopsis of Sad Times and what you do over there?
Sure. So Sad Times is a podcast that was actually born out of my one-man show. I did that one-man show in 2017. It was called Invisible Now, from the Dylan lyric, "You're invisible now, you got no secrets to conceal." And in the show, the idea of the show was, you know, it'd be funny is if I did a show where I talked about all the weird shit I've been afraid of. And I'm talking about, like, when I was a kid, I was afraid I was going to stick my head in a tornado siren and lose my hearing, to which everybody goes, well, just don't stick your head in a tornado siren. I said, you're missing the point. I was afraid for a good long while I was going to die in the electric chair. I had a full-on panic attack about that in Chicago. My poor dad didn't know what the fuck to do. And the goal of the show was, here's my weird shit. Very much like what you just said. Here's my story. And then people say, oh my God, I feel the same way. And I partnered with a mental health organization in the city of Chicago. And after I was doing the show, and after one show I came out, and there was a woman standing there with her daughter, who was maybe 18, 19, I don't know. And she introduced herself, said, hi, my name is, and shame on me, I don't remember her name. I work with Cathedral Counseling, which is who I worked with, and said, this is my daughter. And I looked to my right where she was, and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, you know, all her life, she's been trying to explain to me what's going on with her brain. And then at the end of the show, she pointed and said, that's what's happening. And that was one of the best moments of my entire life ever. Because again, it helps people feel less alone. It helps them feel less ashamed of what they're going through. And that was wonderful. So I did that show. And then a friend of mine approached me. He was trying to build a streaming channel on Twitch. He said, I want you to do your show again. I said, you know, I've already done that. And then one night I got drunk, and I was stopped by his house. I said, all right, here's my idea. I want to have people come on the show, and I wanted them to talk about sad, difficult times in their life. And what I don't want to do is try to fix it. I don't want to diagnose it, and I don't want to judge it. I just want them to talk about it. And the goal here is to help people feel less alone. So it was originally a Twitch streaming show, and then due to life changes and having to move and stuff, we turned it into a podcast. And so each week we have a kind and generous guest, of which you have been one. We just have not released it yet as of this recording, where we have somebody come on and talk about those extremely difficult times in their life. And people may wonder, well, why, how do people, I guess people, I don't know what people wonder, but I guess I will say that these are very difficult conversations and difficult stories to tell. So what I always like to remind people is that the guest on Sad Times decides 100% of what we talk about. And as you know, we have a process that we go through where we build an outline, and then the guest approves that outline. And then once we do the show, outline is locked into place, and that person knows that I'm not going to just throw some question about, well, did this ever happen to you? Any of that bullshit, right? Because it's a very vulnerable thing that these guests are doing, and a courageous thing, and a wonderful thing. And so that's what Sad Times is. And so we release every Tuesday, and I think we're on next week, episode 75. And we release every Tuesday, and as I said, there is some levity in there. I know it's called Sad Times, but it's really about the stories, and about listening wherever you are, listening to that story and hearing something and saying, oh, I thought I was the only one who felt that way. Oh my God, somebody else thinks that? And I think this battles in a teeny tiny way what I call empathy entropy, which is, people, if you don't understand other people, or you don't make the effort, or you don't hear stories, your empathy goes down. And without empathy, we're all fucked. So that's what Sad Times is. And I'm looking forward to releasing your episode. But you can find us anywhere podcasts magically appear on your phone. And you can find us at www, which means World Wide Web, sadtimespodcast.com, or on Instagram at Sad Times Podcast. At the website, you will see you can listen to all the episodes. You can register to be a guest. There's some other cool stuff. We have a blog where we do guest blogs, etc. So that's what Sad Times is.
Actually, I have to say, your website is very robust. Very robust.
Oh, thank you. I want to put a plug in for Podpage, which is what I use for that. Have you ever heard of this? Okay. Podpage is one of the greatest things I've ever encountered. I went to the webpage. It's podpage.com. And it said, see your website in less than 5 minutes. And I was like, okay. And then it says, put in your RSS feed. So if anybody who has a podcast, you have an RSS feed, which is how it gets out to the world. So I put it in. I swear to you, in 45 seconds, it's like thinking. And it just was like, bam. There were all the episodes, all this stuff. Now, I redesigned it with that and added other things. But my whole thing was like, I don't know how to build a website. I don't know, whatever. And it did it in 45 seconds. So if you are listening to this and you host a podcast, I cannot say Podpage enough. And it's, it's affordable, and it's really great.
Awesome. Anything to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kevin, I have enjoyed this so much. I enjoyed talking to you a lot.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it. And I love the work that you're doing. And you're just kicking ass and taking names. So congratulations to you. And thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming. And, I just feel like every voice out there, every person out there, if, I know my approach is, if I can help one person, then, that's a great thing. If we can all help one person, I think we can really help a lot of people together. So thank you for that. And to my listeners, stay well and be resilient, and we will catch you next time.